Hey guys, and welcome back for yet another case updates video. Yes, I have another one for you. I have so many huge things to talk about that simply can't wait, including all of the details of the boy in the box identification, more in the Somerton Man, and a pretty big update in the Madeleine McCann case that I've seen barely anyone talking about, and more. We all know that big updates like this, cases being solved, big steps forward in investigations, are what we hope and pray for in true crime. It's our end goal. So being able to share videos like this never fails to fill my heart with a bit of joy. There aren't many silver linings to true crime, there aren't really any, but this is about as close as we're going to get. And like I did in my last case updates episode, I'm going to be donating a large portion of the profits of this video directly towards one of the cases we're going to be talking about today. So please do sit through the ads here if you're able to. I'll probably even include a couple more than usual in this video just to get maximum AdSense so we can really make a difference with this donation. I know ads are annoying, I know nobody wants to sit through them, but it really is such an easy way for you to be an active viewer in the true crime genre, at no loss to you. Thanks to my last video, I was able to donate $200 towards the DNA Doe project, probably even more each month as more payments come through from that video, so let's see if we can do even more with this one. Or, of course, if you'd rather donate directly, the link to do so will be down below. Money and donations are such a tangible way for us to be able to make a difference here. Other than just spreading the words of cases, learning and educating, money really is pretty much the only way we can make a difference. So let's do it. One of my major goals in 2023 on my YouTube and all my platforms is to really be able to up my fundraising efforts. I know I don't get the most views on my videos, I don't have the most subscribers out of all the true crime platforms, true crime YouTube channels, I'm far from it. But I want to be able to make that tangible difference. So if you've got any ideas in terms of fundraising, then please do let me know. I'm thinking things like live streams, maybe challenges. I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking of ideas, so if there's any way that you can think that we can make money on this platform to donate to charities like DNA Doe Project, let me know. So I'll start with some smaller updates before we get into the more complex ones. So back in January 2019, so 4 years ago now, I covered the case of Kyron Horman, a 7-year-old boy who went missing from his school, Skyline Elementary, in Portland, Oregon on 4th of June 2010. He'd just attended his school science fair, which is where the last known photograph of him would be taken. Within the hour of this, he would disappear. Now, I'll include a link in my description box to my original video on Kyron, as well as all the original videos of the cases I'm going to be talking about today. There you can go and learn all the details and theories around his disappearance. But today I want to simply share with you a new age-progressed photo of Kyron that was actually released in June of this year. So my apologies, this is slightly late, I completely missed this update at the time. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the image on your screen now as released by the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. It depicts Kyron as he would look today, 12 years after his disappearance. If you're listening to this episode via my podcast, I'd recommend you just Google Kyron Horman age progressed photo. When this new photo was released, Kyron would be 19 years old. As of today, he'd be 20. Other than that, there's not a whole load to report in Kyron's case. He would have just turned 20 years old in September, and his family held a car wash to honour him and raise money to help in the search. To this day, his family haven't given up hope that he's out there somewhere just waiting to be found. An article on thatOregonLife.com from July 2022 features Kyron's mother asking Multnomah County's district attorney to create a specialised task force to help solve the case. It doesn't look like they've done that, but according to the district attorney Mike Schmidt, the case is still open and being investigated. To this day, there's a $50,000 reward for anyone with any information that helps solve this case. I'll leave details down below for the authorities that you can contact if you do happen to know something. Next up, I want to talk about Tara Calico, another case that I covered many years ago, I think all the way back in September 2017. It might have actually been one of the very first cases I covered on my channel, and I'm very tempted to redo that video because I know I could do it more justice now, but I suppose that's neither here nor there. If you are deep in the true crime community online, if you are active in the community, as I know so many of you are, you might have heard these rumours about an update in Tara Calico's case. But if I'm being completely honest, it does seem to be more of a rumour than anything else. But regardless, I wanted to share with you this latest update of sorts. To refresh you on Tara's case, she was an American woman who disappeared from near her home in Belen, New Mexico on September 20th, 1988. She had gone on her daily bike ride along New Mexico State Road 47 and just never came home. Usually her mother went with her on these bike rides, but she'd stopped after feeling they were being stalked by a motorist, and despite her mother's pleas, Tara still insisted on going. And then she disappeared, with the general consensus being that she was abducted whilst on this bike ride. One of the main talking points about Tara's case has always been a Polaroid photo of an unidentified woman that was found in a Florida convenience store car park in July 1988, so almost 1 year after she disappeared. The Polaroid featured a young woman and a boy gagged and maybe bound, and many of Tara's friends and family believe that the young woman resembled Tara, including her mother, who noticed a scar on the woman's leg that was identical to one that Tara had. While Scotland Yard analysed the photo and said it definitely was her, a second analysis by the Los Alamos National Lab disagreed, and an FBI analysis was inconclusive. So there's a lot of question around this Polaroid. And then, over the years, a couple of other Polaroid photos have also surfaced, which are thought to also be Tara. The update here comes in the form of a change on Tara's page on the Doe Network, which now says this is a closed case. Now actually, of course, Tara herself isn't a Jane Doe. The page on Doe Network is actually dedicated to the unidentified woman in the Polaroid photos, who's thought to maybe be Tara. The fact this has now been marked as a closed case suggests that the woman might have been identified, whether that's as Tara or not. Is it the same woman in all three photos? Are they all Tara and none of them Tara? Well, I'm kind of afraid this update leaves us with more questions than answers. People first started talking about this on Twitter, I think around a month ago, and I didn't make a YouTube short about it at the time like I usually do with updates, because I thought surely some authority would make some kind of announcement. But that just hasn't come. Is this maybe a mistake on Doe Network's behalf, or do they know something we don't know? I just do not have the answers for you here, but this has made me very hopeful that there might be an announcement soon, whether it's related to Tara or the Polaroids or both. In researching this though, I did also spot an update from 2021 in Tara's case, which I completely missed at the time, but these new leads may or may not be connected to this Polaroid update. In September 2021, Lieutenant Joseph Rowland of the Valencia County Sheriff's Office told KOAT.com, "She's certainly not forgotten. She's not forgotten in the hearts of the residents of Valencia County, nor has she been forgotten by the Valencia County Sheriff's Office." He also said that recently a search warrant relevant to this case had been executed at a home in Valencia County, but that warrant is still sealed, so we don't know exactly what it was for. But it's encouraging that over 34 years on, movements are still being made in this case. People are still investigating it. And maybe, hopefully, one day soon, we'll get another update. The FBI are offering a $20,000 reward for information that helps solve this case. Again, the contact details, this time for the FBI directly, will be in the description box. Moving on, we have some updates in the case of Bible John, which refers to an unidentified serial killer who's believed to have been responsible for the murders of 3 women between 1968 and 1969 in Glasgow in Scotland. It actually seems like in the past few weeks there's been a lot of new information suddenly come out about this case, so I'm going to begin with accusations of a cover-up. Now, this accusation was first made in a new BBC podcast called Bible John, Creation of a Serial Killer, which, full disclaimer here, I haven't actually listened to yet, but there's a lot of articles talking about the content of this podcast online, so I've kind of got the gist. I do want to listen to it though. The podcast tracked down senior detectives DCI Jim McEwen and Detective Constable Brian Hughes, who reopened the Bible John cold case back in 1995. And they said that they found evidence at that time that a man called John McInnes was actually Bible John. Helen Puttock was murdered in 1969 after a man shared a taxi home with her, a man who said that his name was John and quoted a religious verse at her, hence the nickname Bible John. Whilst there was no actual evidence at the time that John McInnes was the one responsible was Bible John, the podcasters claimed that senior officials at the time knew about his name in connection with this case, but they kept out of official records because the chief was very good friends with McInnes' cousin, Jimmy McInnes. Apparently 2 days after Helen was found, officers went to John McInnes' home, but they didn't actually take him to the big police station to be questioned, instead taking him to a smaller police office. The detectives from 1995 also said that they found inconsistencies in the recording of the identity parades, which meant that Helen's sister Jean, who actually had been in the taxi with the pair, never actually saw McInnes in a parade and therefore never had a chance to identify him. The taxi driver was also never asked to identify John McInnes in the flesh, but was shown a picture to which he said he wasn't sure if it was the same man or not. However, a bouncer at the Barrowland Ballroom where the trio had been that night said that McInnes had definitely been in there. But despite all of this, McInnes' name just seems to be breezed over in all the reports. His name doesn't actually appear anywhere in the 1969 inquiry, even though we know that he'd been questioned. The 1995 detectives also apparently found that evidence had been lost. For example, there was a card bearing the name of Moylan's Furniture Store that was apparently found at one of the crime scenes, as written in the reports, but this card was nowhere to be found in the archives. It had just disappeared. Did investigators back in 1969 know who Bible John was all along? The Daily Record reports that back in 1996 they actually exhumed McInnes' body. He'd died many years beforehand after taking his own life, so a DNA sample could be tested against surviving evidence, but there was no conclusive match. So we've known about John McInnes' possible connection with the case since the mid-1990s, but we didn't know about the allegations of a possible cover-up. But that's not all we have in terms of Bible John news. At the end of November, an article was released, again on the Daily Record, about how a Spanish award-winning author called Dolores Redondo believes that Bible John is alive and well and living in the north of Spain. Now, I'm reporting on this here just because it's big news currently in the Bible John case, but in all honesty, I don't think there's much in this. Dolores made this claim whilst promoting her newest novel called Waiting for the Flood, in which a Scottish detective pursues Bible John all the way to Bilbao in Spain. Bilbao is a large port town which many Scottish companies are said to operate out of, but importantly, this novel is a work of fiction, it is not real life. Although Dolores did seek the opinions of psychology and psychiatry experts to help her form a profile of Bible John for her book, this version of him is just a character. I figure this update is worth mentioning here, even though it's not much of an update at all. It is just an author drumming up publicity for her new book. But when you Google Bible John currently, this is the headline of all the articles, that he's living in the north of Spain. It's not the case, I'm just dispelling rumours over here. And with that, let's move on to yet another update in the Madeleine McCann case. The way the updates in this case are being covered in the British media right now is absolutely fascinating to me. This is a case that's been the front page of the newspapers at least once a month since the day Madeleine disappeared on 3rd of May 2007 from Praia de Luz in Portugal. It's the most heavily reported missing persons case in modern history, but this newest update just doesn't seem to have made it to those front pages. It's absolutely fascinating to me. Everything in the British media has intense thought behind it. Nothing is an accident, especially in the tabloids. That could be a whole other video. We know how calculated all of the British media is. So the fact this new update isn't being plastered everywhere is really interesting to me. One could come up with some conspiracy theories, I'm sure, but this isn't the time nor the place. I've spoken about the movements in the Madeleine McCann case in quite a few update videos over the past year, maybe even couple of years, and I won't rehash every little detail, so instead I'll link all those videos down below if you do want to go and watch. But in a nutshell, a 45-year-old man called Christian Bruckner has been put forward as a suspect in the case after having a very questionable criminal history. He's currently serving a 7-year prison sentence in Germany for a rape he committed in Portugal back in 2005, and he's known to have allegedly committed several sexual offences in Portugal between 2000 and 2017, where he was known to be living at the time. The sexual abuse allegations made against Bruckner involve the rapes of 2 unknown women in Portugal, the rape of a 20-year-old Irish woman, and the sexual abuse of a 10-year-old German girl in April 2007 on a Portuguese beach, a beach very close to where Madeleine would vanish just 1 month later. Regardless of whether or not this man is guilty in Madeleine's case, of which there is very mixed opinion, this isn't a good guy. He has, of course, denied any involvement in her case, but of course, anyone would do. The update here is that at the end of November, a German court issued a fresh arrest warrant for Bruckner for a fresh string of sex crimes. Just a month previously, he was charged with 5 additional crimes, and this just keeps piling up. At the time, the prosecutor's office in Germany confirmed the accused is the same person against whom charges were brought in connection with the disappearance of the then 3-year-old British girl Madeleine Beth McCann. This new arrest warrant still needs to be approved by Italy, which is where he was arrested in 2018 before being extradited back to his native Germany, and they are awaiting a decision on whether to send him to trial in these additional cases. To me, it looks like they're not taking any risks in letting this man out of prison. He was due to originally be let out on this rape charge in 2025, but the longer he's in prison and under their watchful eye, the more they can look into any connections, if there are any, to the Madeleine McCann case. Bruckner wrote in a letter obtained by the Mirror, "There is no evidence at all that I committed any of these crimes. No DNA, nothing. The prosecution are trying to trap me and hope that I will capitulate under the mental pressure. They hope that I will just say yes to everything, which will give me a chance to escape from this mental torture." But the German prosecutor has said that Madeleine is dead and he is 100% sure that Bruckner is the culprit. 100%. They do have investigators in Germany working solely on Maddie's case, trying to make any connections they can. The question, I suppose, is whether or not these connections really exist. And if these connections do exist, how are they going to prove them? In my last updates video, I spoke about an update in the LISK case, the Long Island serial killer, in which they're attempting to identify a number of does, and in that update I focused solely on one doe nicknamed Peaches. Well, it seems in doing that, I completely missed another huge update in the LISK case, so thank you so much to everyone in the comments who let me know. This update actually came all the way back in May 2020, and it seems I just never picked up on it. Around the year 2000, the naked torso of a woman was found along Halsey Manor Road in Manorville, New York. And then in 2011, as part of the search for LISK victims, dismembered remains were found along Ocean Parkway in Long Island, New York, along with the remains of several other victims. Thanks to DNA testing at the time, it was confirmed that all these remains found on Ocean Parkway and in Manorville belonged to the same victim, who was nicknamed Manorville Jane Doe or Jane Doe No. 6. However, it wouldn't be until 2020 that her identity would be confirmed as 24-year-old Valerie Mack through, of course, genetic genealogy. Investigators found a genetic match in a male cousin, which led them to Valerie's genetic aunt. The aunt, Ellen Munnings, was asked if she knew of any relatives with a daughter, and she said that while she could account for most of her nieces, she didn't know about any of the daughters of her sister, Patricia Fulton, who by this point had been dead for nearly 18 years. Patricia had lost custody of all of her children, one of whom was called Valerie. From there, investigators were led to Valerie's adopted family and to her now adult son, whose DNA tested positive as a match, fully confirming Jane Doe No. 6's identity. This was the first time that a law enforcement agency in New York State had used genetic genealogy to identify an individual. Valerie had disappeared from her adoptive parents, Edwin and Joanne Max's lives, around October 2000, and whilst they did say they searched for her for years, always fearing the worst, she was never actually officially reported as missing. When they went to the police station, they were simply told that she was over 21 years old and had a history of running away. There was nothing they could do, which makes my blood boil. How many other unidentified people do we have out there because police refuse to take a missing persons report? There must be so many. In June 2022, Valerie's family spoke to Newsday, hoping that finally sharing her story publicly might help spark some fresh investigative leads. Investigators have said that Valerie was a sex worker, and relatives say that she had a very difficult life. She had a very unsettled childhood, being orphaned at a very young age, and she was just sort of bounced around the system until she was adopted by the Macks in 1985 when she was 9 years old. Valerie's sister would say to Newsday, "The thing I remember about her most was how fiercely protective and nurturing she was towards those she cared about. I looked up to her and she was the coolest person on the planet to my little kid mind." Although it's said that for a few years Valerie seemed very happy and settled in her new adoptive home, at the age of 14 things started to unravel a bit when she clearly started going through a bit of a crisis. She had a lot of childhood trauma. From what I can gather, the Macks were a very Christian religious family and Valerie was very rebellious. She started skipping school, doing drugs, hanging out with the wrong people, and they just didn't really know what to do with her. When she turned 17, the state social service system decided that she should be treated as an adult, and in the early 90s she moved in with her biological half-sister Deirdre in Wildwood, New Jersey. In 1994, she gave birth to her son Benjamin, but eventually she left him with his father, terrified that she didn't know how to be a good mother. She jumped between living in New Jersey and Philadelphia, where she would be arrested 3 times for sex work, drugs and loitering, mostly under the alias Melissa Taylor. In 1999, Valerie would be diagnosed with pericarditis, an inflammation of the outer lining of the heart, and this seemed to be a bit of a wake-up call for her. It caused her to move back in with her parents, and she slowly started to turn her life around. But sadly, this didn't last long, and Valerie soon fell into old habits. Like I said, she had a lot of trauma, she'd had a really hard life, she just didn't know how to be still. When she disappeared around October 2000, her family were terrified that something had happened to her, and it would turn out that their fears were a sad reality. Despite desperately searching and trying to file a missing persons report, they would hear nothing more about what happened to Valerie until February 2020, when investigators told them that she had been identified as one of the LISK victims. For 2 decades, Valerie's family had been searching for her, searching for answers, and whilst this was absolutely not the outcome they would have wanted, they could finally rest, they had some closure. And with each identification of a doe found on Ocean Parkway, we potentially get one step closer to identifying the person responsible for their death. Investigators think the assailant was a lone man who had a particular hatred for sex workers. That's one person responsible for all this heartache. Investigators are asking anyone with any information about Valerie Mack, particularly in the weeks or days leading up to her death, to come forward. You never know what could be helpful. Whilst we're talking about Jane Does, next I want to mention a small but quite exciting update in the Lorraine Stahl case. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, some of the proceeds of this will be going directly towards Lorraine's case, in which DNA Solves are currently trying to raise $7,500 for testing. The name Lorraine Stahl refers to the case of an unidentified woman who was found in Ledyard, Connecticut. Her body was found alongside a man who was later identified as Gustavus Lee Carmichael, a convicted bank robber who was on the run. Gustavus was known to use a number of aliases, and it seems he brought this unidentified woman in on this. She'd stolen the identity of a local woman named Lorraine Stahl and was using that name up until her death, but that isn't who she really was. This all happened back in May 1974, and despite exhaustive efforts, investigators have never been able to find answers, and the case very soon went cold. In 2022, the Connecticut Office of Chief Medical Examiner partnered with Othram to see if forensic DNA testing could help in this case. And we all know how incredible Othram are. I have no doubt they are going to get answers in this case, they always do. The crowdfund has been set up to help raise funds for the casework costs here, and by watching the ads to this video, you can help contribute towards hopefully solving this case, getting her identity. Or, of course, I'll leave the link for her DNA Solves page down below, so if you want to directly contribute yourself, you can, of course, do that. Anyone with any information that could aid in this investigation is encouraged to contact the Connecticut Office of Chief Medical Examiner. The number and case number will both be down below, just in case. If you happen to live in or near Ledyard, make sure you're talking about this case with friends and relatives, particularly those who were around at this time, 1974. But of course, these are not all the does we have to talk about in this case update. Let's round this video off by talking about all the latest updates in the identifications of the Summerton Man and the boy in the box, starting with the former. After 74 years, in August 2022, the Summerton Man was finally identified by Adelaide University Professor Derek Abbott and amazing genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick. He was identified as Carl Charles Webb, born in 1905. It is important to note though that while South Australia Police say they are cautiously optimistic about this identification, they are undergoing their own investigations and the identity hasn't been officially confirmed yet. But hopefully that will come in the next few months. But none of this information is brand new. We've known he's potentially Charles Webb since last summer. I'll link all my past videos on this case below. What is an update is some extra information we've come to learn about Charles Webb and his life. Charles was identified through 3 strands of hair that were found on his death mask, with forensic tech being able to find his DNA profile. Incredibly, this hair yielded 2 million DNA markers even 3/4 of a century later. This was then uploaded to a DNA database where they found as many as 4,000 possible matches, and the mission began to find the one person who could possibly be the Summerton Man. In this family tree, Professor Abbott was looking for a person with no date of death, eventually coming across a man called Charles Webb, who stood out because he was male, roughly the right age, and was connected to a Keane family. Items of his clothing was found to be labelled as belonging to a T. Keane. Having identified a possible person as Summerton Man, Abbott either had to prove this or eliminate the possibility. On Charles's maternal side, they searched down the family tree until they found someone alive today who might be willing to supply a DNA sample, and that person was Antero Bonifacio from Barnsdale in Victoria. Antero got a call from Professor Abbott, and after confirming he was who he said he would, he consented to the testing, and when it came back, it was a match. From there, a man called Stuart Webb was also contacted, later telling ABC's Australian Story, Professor Abbott asked me if I was related to Norman Webb, who's my grandfather, and that led to a whole series of questions about my heritage and whether there's any photos or family histories that I can recall. Norman Webb was Charles Webb's brother. In looking through old family photos, Stuart Webb and his sister Christy Webb were eventually able to find a couple of photos of Charles, one being in the front row of a football team photo. The infamous Summerton Man sat in their family photo albums all along. It seems he was a part of the Swinburne Technical College's under-16s football team. There was also an old family group photo, Charles sitting in the back row and seemingly goofing around with his brother-in-law. Although we now have these photos of Charles though, his life is still shrouded in quite a bit of mystery. We know he was one of 6 siblings. He grew up and worked in the family bakery business in Springdale, Victoria. When the bakery closed down, it's thought he trained as an electrical instrument maker. We know he married a woman called Dorothy Robertson in 1941, but that marriage would eventually end in divorce after his disappearance. In later divorce documents, Dorothy stated that Charles was moody, he didn't have any friends, he was socially inept, and he was violent. In March 1946, she suspected that he tried to take his own life after she came home to a house smelling of strong anaesthetic and a husband just staring into space. She took the time to nurse him back to health, but he was never grateful for her time and efforts and just got more violent. She said that he would write a lot of poetry, mostly about death and how unhappy he was, and ending his own life was apparently his greatest mission. This all matches with a copy of the Rubaiyat that was closely linked to the Somerton Man's body over the years. Investigators back in 1948 suspected that Somerton Man had taken his own life, likely taking a poison that caused his heart to fail, and with what we know about Charles Webb, that still seems to track. In the period leading up to Charles's own death, his mother, father and close brother Roy all died, and when he disappeared, heading from Melbourne to Adelaide in April 1947, no one reported him as missing. This includes his wife, who had actually fled from him in 1946 after she'd nursed him back to health and he became more violent. Between April 1947 and his discovery on the 1st of December 1948, nobody really knows what happened to him, where he was. It's speculated that he might have gone to Adelaide to try and track Dorothy down, who was reported as living there in 1951, but that is just speculation. There are still so many unanswered questions surrounding this case. Many questions we'll probably never get the answers to so many years later. But I suppose none of us are entitled to the details of the traumas of someone's life. We're not even entitled to his name. But after so many decades of public interest, it is nice to get it. It's nice to have some answers. It's nice to know it's possible to get them in cases as old as this. It provides us with hope in other cold cases. As I said earlier on, I do want to stress again that this has not been an official identification. The authorities are still working on that, but it is known that they've contacted many of the same family members who have previously been contacted by Professor Abbott. I don't know what the delay is in publicly confirming this identity. It is beginning to make me wonder if there's more to the story, but it could just be that they're ensuring a thorough and complete DNA investigation here. Which brings us on to our final update of this video, and that's the identification of the boy in the box as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Now, I have done a few YouTube shorts surrounding this identification, as I always tend to do when fresh information is released, but here I get to talk about it in much more detail. The case of the boy in the box has often been called America's biggest unsolved case, with the boy also being known as America's unknown child. It's a case that's felt really personal to a lot of people, as they often do when a child is involved. On the 25th of February 1957, the body of a young boy, who we now know to have been just 4 years old, was found in the woods off of Susquehanna Road in Fox Chase, Philadelphia. The body was in a box and wrapped in a plaid blanket, and it was clear that he had been abused in life. He was severely malnourished. Despite an exhaustive investigation at the time by the Philadelphia police and being incredibly prevalent in the USA media for decades, no answers were found as to his identity. For the full investigation details, I'll link my original video in the description box. And then in 2022, he was finally identified as 4-year-old Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born January 13th, 1953. Although at the press conference announcing his identity, a decent amount of information was shared, we don't have all the answers, nor does it seem like investigators do at this time. This is still an open investigation as the authorities try to figure out how he ended up in the box, who exactly was responsible. With it being almost 66 years since Joseph was found on the side of that road, many of the people who may have been responsible or involved in his death will have since died themselves, taking any answers with them. But what we do know is Joseph was identified via DNA and genetic genealogy techniques, with the road to these answers beginning back in April 2019, when a court granted approval for investigators to exhume his body in order to apply modern DNA analysis techniques. In a connection to the Somerton Man case, it was famed forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick who was hugely involved here. She was a part of the Vidocq Society, which is a Philadelphia crime-solving club who have been helping police out in this case for many years now. Vidocq are a non-profit society made up of former law enforcement personnel and forensic professionals who dedicate their spare time to solving cold cases. Through this, Colleen got her hands on the boy's DNA, describing what came next as the most challenging case in her whole career. It took 2.5 years for her to get the DNA in proper shape for testing. It was like confetti when it came to her. Once they were able to piece the DNA together, they used publicly available genetic records to develop a list of boy's potential relatives, eventually being able to find his family members and even a birth certificate. Colleen has said there is no question it is Joseph Augustus Zarelli, no question. They first managed to make contact with maternal relatives and find the identity of his birth mother, and through that they got a court order for birth, death and adoption records in relation to this mother. They found birth certificates for a couple of her children, one of which was Joseph, on which the name of his birth father was listed. They then found a living relative of this listed father, DNA tested them and confirmed the paternal connection. However, the birth mother and birth father have both since died. Throughout the press conference announcing this identity, the investigators seemed to put a lot of emphasis on biological family members. Now, what I'm about to say next is purely my own speculation, so please do take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. But reading between the lines, I thought they seemed to be hinting that perhaps Joseph was adopted, and perhaps the adoptive parents are the ones responsible for his death. I mean, adoption records were even mentioned in the press conference, albeit in passing. Again, this has not been confirmed by anyone, it's purely speculation, but I've also seen a lot of discussion around this possibility online as well, so I don't think I was the only one to pick up on this. Rumours flying around at the time of his identification seemed to suggest a prominent Philadelphia family being involved in his death, but the Zarellis didn't seem to be that. Although investigators declined to release the names of Joseph's parents as well as those of his number of living siblings in order to protect their privacy, online sleuths have of course already been able to track down possible relatives, both dead and alive, using the information they were given. I mean, Zarelli is not a particularly common surname. I have seen the information found by sleuths online, but I'm not going to share it in this video as I don't wish to mess with the investigation in any way. If investigators deem that information important to be shared, I'm sure they would have done so at the press conference. However, in sharing the more unusual last name of Joseph, people have speculated that police kind of want people to do their own research, but again, that's just speculation. Although detectives said that they have found Joseph's family and have even said that he lived in West Philadelphia near Market and 61st Streets, they stopped short of sharing who they believe is responsible for his murder and instead stated that they believe identifying the person responsible will be an uphill battle. As Philadelphia Police Captain Jason Smith said, "It's going to be an uphill battle for us to definitively determine who caused this child's death. If this technology had been available to us 20 years ago, it might be a completely different story, because once you identify who the child is, you start interviewing family members. Well, at this point in time, a lot of the family members who would have been old enough to have a memory of any incident that might have occurred are normally long gone." Investigators 100% do have their suspicions about who exactly is responsible, but they fail to share what these suspicions are. In sharing the identity in this press conference, investigators hoped that it would lead to a number of tips from the public, particularly from the older generations who were around at this time. They've said they're going to filter through every single tip that comes in the hope that there's someone out there who remembers a child or the family in question, or perhaps somebody remembers a child going missing suspiciously. I have no doubt that more information is going to come out about this case in the coming months and years. I do hope that they will be able to definitively say who is responsible for this death, but it does seem like said people or person have since passed, so full justice may not ever be obtained here, and arrest may never be made. But still, answers and named dignity for Joseph is so important. Joseph's remains are currently resting at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia under the name of America's Unknown Child, but soon the headstone will be changed to reflect his real name, a name that deserves to be spoken aloud: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was a child, he was barely 4 years old, he lived a life of abuse and malnourishment, a life that no child deserves to lead. This is an active and ongoing investigation. Again, anyone with any information about Joseph or his family are asked to contact the Philadelphia police. No tip is deemed too small. A lot of cases are solved on tiny bits of information that most people discard as not important. So literally anything you have, share it with the police. If you or your friends or relatives lived in Philadelphia at the time of Joseph's death, 1957, and the years leading up to it, please make sure you share this information with them. The generation the investigators most need to know this information are the generation who are least likely to be online keeping track of these updates. So talk to your older relatives who might know something, urge them to share that information. Did they know the Zarellis? With that, I think I'm going to round up this video. If you know of any updates I might have missed, please let me know in the comments down below so I can be sure to include them in my next video. Thank you so much if you watched all the way to the end here. Thank you for caring enough about these cases to check back in. Thank you, hopefully, for watching all the ads, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.